First step is to add the dependency to our application. As we are using Spring Boot, the dependency is Spring Doc OpenAPI UI. So by adding this dependency, we now have enabled Swagger default configurations. Okay, with this default configuration, we can see the documentation of all our APIs in the application, that is in the JSON format. So let's start the server and let's try to access the default Swagger API docs for our application. Okay, the application is up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the browser and try to access the Swagger API docs. So the URI is going to be v3, that is the version 3 API docs. If I hit enter, and you can see that I get the JSON format of all the APIs in our application. So this is kind of, a little not readable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and put it into some JSON formatter. And you can see that all the information of our REST APIs. Okay, to make it more readable, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to view, and you can see that we have info that says OpenAPI definition. And if you also see the paths, these are the paths that we have in our flight controller, right? This is get flight by number, flight number, then ID, then we have get, put, post method, and also we have the delete. Okay, so this is the JSON format. Okay, and now we can pass this to the client, and the client can read this and try to access our REST APIs. We also have a UI for this, all the REST APIs, and the path is going to be localhost swagger UI.html. If you hit this, you can see that now we have the UI for all our APIs. So by using this, now we don't need to use any other tools like Postman. We can make use of this and test our APIs. For example, if you see here, if I say flight ID, you can see there is a button called try it out. If I click on this, I can pass the some values here, and if I say like 8 here, and if I click on execute, it's going to give me the result here, the response. This way, Swagger, using Swagger, we can also test our REST APIs. So this is all, a default configuration, right? So you can see we also have our models, that is the response that we send back to the client. So all this information also can be viewed in our UI. So these are all default configuration. So how can we customize this? To do that, we need to make some configuration changes in our application. So let's go to our IDE and add those configuration. So what I'm going to do is first I'll add in a class which is a configuration, annotated with configuration. Here I'm going to add the OpenAPI configurations. Okay, so I'm going to create a bean here, and the bean name is going to be public OpenAPI. I'm going to pass an object of OpenAPI. I'll call this as OpenAPI config. Okay, and I'm going to return OpenAPI object, so that you can see that we have it from the Swagger. And the same thing I need to import here. Next, what I'm going to do is on this, I'm going to add the info. And we also have info class in OpenAPI, and on this I'm going to add the title. Now instead of having a default title, we're going to add our own title, and I'll give this as airline RESTful web services. And next I'm going to have is the version. The version is going to be 1.0.0, and then next I'm going to have is the, I'll give some description, and description I'll give you this as R for RESTful web services. And I will also add terms of service, where this is going to be the terms page of the website of the company, and I'll give this as unitedcon.com terms. And let's add even license. Okay, the license is going to be, again, it's coming from, we also have a license class in OpenAPI, and on this I'm going to first name this as in ID can, and on this I'll add the URL, and the URL is again going to be the same as what we have for the terms of service. Okay, so I think it looks all good. Yeah, so what we did, we added the title, and then we added the version, there's some description to it, and then also terms of service and the license. Okay, I can say this as license. Yeah, perfect. So to next we need to add a bean annotation so that the bean gets created. Okay, the server is reloading. Now let's go back to our UI and refresh the page. Now you can see that instead of the default titles and information, now we have the one that we configured. So this is how we customize the header part of the UI. The next what we're going to do is we're also going to configure or customize the information on our APIs. Okay, all this information, like we are going to add some information description to the methods and also the parameters. To do that, first let's go to our controller class, and first let me stop the server. And on the class level we have an annotation called tag, and on this what I'm going to do is I'm going to tag it and name this as flight. I'm going to give some description to this, saying flight resource. Okay, then on the method what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some documentation or metadata to this. So it is a method, right? It's an operation. So we have an operation annotation. And on this, I'm going to add, first is this summary that says that this is a get method. I'll add some summary to this. Okay, so I'll add this as get flight, and then some description. I would give this as fetch the flight record by flight ID. Okay, and I will also add method. That is basically the method is that it says the HTTP method, what type of method it is. So here it is get, and then I'm going to add the tags. As tags is it takes an array, and I'll name this as the same here what we have at the class level. Perfect. So this is our operation, that is the method information. Okay, next what we are going to do is we are going to add some information about the parameter here that we have. Okay, we can add parameter annotation at the argument level, or we can also add it here, okay, at the method level. So what we're going to do is, for this we're going to add at the method level, and the information on this is name. Name, I'm going to give this as ID, and then I will also give an example. Okay, example as, let's give some ID as 8, and then I would say whether it is required or not. Yes, it is. Then the description, I would say the description as flight ID. And next, there is another parameter that says in, and this is nothing but it specifies how is this parameter going to come. It's going to come as, if you look at, it is coming in the cookie, or by default, or the header, or in the path, whether it is in the URI path itself, or it's coming in the request URI. Okay, so in this case it is as a path variable, so we are going to use this. Okay, so that is what we provide the information about the parameter. Next is the response, right? There are three main parts of any API. One is the method itself, next is the parameter that we are passing to the method, and third is the response. So what are the responses that this method can return to the client? For that, we have an annotation called API responses. Okay, as you can see, it takes an array, that is value, an array of API response, and then we have here API response. On this, what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to tell the response code, that is whether it is a success or it is a failure. So first I'm going to add the success, and next I'm going to give the description. The description is going to be the fetch is successful. Okay, and I will also add what would be the content of that response. Okay, as you can see, we have an attribute called content, and I'm going to use that to specify the content type, and the content is going to be the flight DTO, right? For that, we need to add a use schema attribute. This is going to be @schema, and in this we have something called implementation. Okay, let me scroll to the right. Flight DTO dot class. Okay, so with that, what we have done is we have added, let me break down this to the next line. So what we have added, the response code, the description, and the content of the response for a successful fetch. And we will also add some more information, like what is going to be the media type. Okay, the media type, that is the return type of this, is going to be JSON value, right? For that, I'm just going to say it as media type dot into be JSON value. Okay, and the thing, we also have it here, right? We can also add the same thing here, instead of having it, blank, saying that this method is going to return, or it produces an object of flight DTO that is going to be of JSON type. That's what the produces attribute means here. Okay, you can see that it takes an array. That means you can have multiple type of media type, but it is always recommended that we have one type of format, rather than having multiple, until unless it is required to make use of multiple media types. Okay, so with that, what we have done is we have added the successful um, API response. Now let's see what happens when there is an error, right? In the case of error, we also send a response, right? And for this, if the record was not found, it's going to be 404, right? And description is going to be flight resource not found. And in this case, what is going to be the content? If you remember, we have an exception handling that returns the API error response, right? So in the flight service, if you see, we have, you know, a check. What we do is, if the flight ID was not found, we throw the response status exception with status not found. And this is caught in our API exception handler here. And here is where we wrap the exception and return an API error response object to the class. So this is what we are going to have it in our documentation here. So the content is going to be, again, the content annotation schema schema implementation is going to be API response dot class. Okay, and again, the media type is going to be the type dot application JSON. Perfect. So I guess we are missing something here. Yeah, we have added. Perfect. So next is one more API response where we have, any generic exception, like if there is any failure in the controller or in the service or in the repository, then we throw an handle response, right? So let's add that to here, and the response is going to be 500. And the description, I would say that as server exception. Okay, and then the content is going to be the same. So let's copy this from here and add. Okay, so now I guess these are all the possible response for this API. So I think we are good with the information about our API, that is the get flight API. Let's save this and let's continue adding this information to all other APIs. Let me copy this and put it to the get all flights here. Okay, so this is going to be, I'll change the description as get all flight, fetch all the flight records, and it's going to be, it's not going to have any parameter. So rest. Okay, so this is not required, and the responses remain the same, right? Okay, and we're also not going to have the 404 because now let's see, it can have a 404 if there is no flight available, right? If there is 0 flights in the database, then there is a chance that it's going to throw a 404 exception. But for now, we'll just keep that as is. And I think this looks good. So let's continue with other APIs. And the next API that we have is the flight number. So here, get flight and fetch the flight record by flight number. And this is going to be flight number. I'm going to do this as 222 and The description is going to be flight number. Okay, and this is coming as path variable here. So I'm going to keep that as path, parameter in as path. The next we have is, yeah, the responses is going to be the same, because if the flight number does not exist, then it's going to throw a 404, and in generic error, it's going to be 500 error. Okay, so this looks good. Then let's copy the same thing to our next API, that is post. And here we have, if you see for the post mapping, we have consumes and produces. That means this API is going to consume the JSON format data. The request body that it is going to come from the client is going to be a format JSON, and it produces JSON format. That is, the flight DTO is going to be of JSON format in the response body. Okay, so create, we are not going to have 404. Okay, so let's remove that. Then we have successful, and we're going to say this as flight record successfully created. And this is going to, the parameter here, what we're going to do is, instead of having it here, we are going to have it in the parameter here, in the argument itself. That is going to be as at parameter, and I'm going to name this okay, so I'm going to have a name for this parameter and call this as flight DTO. Next, what I'm going to have is the description. Okay, and okay, for this, I'm going to say this as flight DTO in the request body. Then I'm going to say this as required is equal to, and I'm going to set true, and then I'm going to have it as content. Okay, the parameter content is going to be @content schema, and implementation is going to be flight DTO.class. Okay, so I think we have everything, and the other thing that we can have here is the in parameter, and I would say this as default. Okay, so what we have added, the operation, API responses, and the parameter. I think the parameter looks good. Okay, so that is fine. Next, we are going to have this for the next method, that is put. So let's do the same, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste this thing here to flight, and you can see that it has the same consumes and produces as application JSON. Then this is going to be okay. Here we have also have to change this. It says create flight. Okay, create flight record, and also change the method to post. Okay, and here is going to be put, or I'll say update flight, update the flight record, and the method is going to be put. Okay, so yes, we are going to have 404, because first what we do is we first check if the record is available in the database, and then we update it, right? So we need to have the 404 in our update. Okay, so that looks good now. The next is the parameters. Parameter is going to be the same for put method as what we have for the post. So let's copy this and put it to the here. Perfect. And finally, the delete method. So let's copy this again and put it here. And this time it's going to be delete flight, delete the flight record. Method is delete. Okay, so 404, yes, we do check the flight exists or delete before we delete it. So this looks good. And then we have, the response is going to be, we are sending void, so we don't have this part, right? We don't send the flight DTO is going to be empty, right? We don't have. Perfect. And we also don't have the media type. Okay. So yes, in case of error, we send back the API error response, 500 API response. Okay. The next is the parameter. So let's copy this from, it's an ID, so it's going to be the same what we have for the get. Let's copy that and add it to the delete parameter argument here. Okay, so all the APIs are now updated with our custom metadata. So let's start the server and see how the UI looks. Okay. Okay, the server is up. Now let's go to our UI and refresh. And you can see that now all our APIs have custom information. For get flight number, you can see we have fetch the flight record by flight number, and we can also have, we can also see the example, right? So if we try and hit execute, it returns an error. It says non-unique query did not return a unique result. Okay, so there is something that I guess we don't have this. We have multiple records with flight number. Okay, so that is something that we need to fix from the database side. But let's try something else and try to fetch some other record, say flight 333, execute, and this gave us source must not be null. Okay, what source? Let's look at one more time. It says source internal server error. Okay, so let's look at our database first and see what are the valid values for flight number. So if we see here, we don't have a flight number that is 333 that we tried here, right? And also we have multiple records with the flight number 222. Right? So that is something that we need to fix. But one thing that we need to make sure is that we send back a user-friendly response, right? You can see that the response that we send back to the client is API error response rather than the trace. Okay, the complete trace of the exception. We send back a user-friendly message. Okay, so that is something that is good. So let's try to access something that we have here. Let's try to access flight number 200. And you can see that we got the response. Okay, that way we can also try different other APIs, and also you can see that the flight response not found. This is what we are going to have the response, and this gives some view of what the response is going to look like in case of 500 or 400, or if it is 400 here, right? So let's look at even on our put method. You can see that we have all this information that we can try. Okay. Also, we have specified that it produces application JSON, and also it consumes application JSON. That's what you're going to see here. Okay, so this way we have documentation for all our APIs, right? And now, if you scroll down, you can also see something called schemas. And these schemas are nothing but our models, like flight DTO here. And if you can see that they are highlighted red because they are mandatory. Okay, so if you go back to our IDE and if you look at our flight DTO here, you can see that we have specified as not null, right? That's the reason why we see here as red asterisk. So we can also add documentation to this, right? Let's add some Swagger documentation, and it is schema. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some name, and the name is going to be flight DTO, and I'm going to use some description. The description is it is model object for flight resource. Okay, the same way we can add this annotation to all our parameters here. Like we can also have it for ID, and I can say this as flight ID of flight resource. Okay, and the same way I can have it for flight number, and also for the capacity, and here is going to be same thing. I'll add it to it and call this as MFD by. Here I'm going to name as manufactured by of flight resource. The same thing I'm going to copy and put it to the manufactured of. Okay, so this way, we can add annotations to our model objects. Okay, and let's save this and go back to our UI and see what it added to our model. Let's refresh this. And if you scroll down, and this time you can see that we also have API response, and you can see the information, right, that we have added to our flight DTO. The same thing we can also do for the API response too. Okay, so with this, now the question comes how we got this, swagger UI.html. Can we customize even the URLs? Right? Can we enable and disable Swagger? Like you would want Swagger to be enabled only in your dev environment, but in production you want to disable it. So we can also do that, in our application by adding some properties in our application.properties file. If you are using Spring Boot, then we can add it to our application.properties file. So let's do that. So in our application.properties file, first thing what we're going to do is we're going to look at the enabling and disabling of the API docs. So if you think that you want to enable API docs only in your dev environment, you can do so by adding this property to your application.properties file. By default, it is enabled, but if you want to disable, you can just add this property and it will disable it. Okay. So now we are just going to comment this because we want to make use of the API docs. Next, what you can also do is you can you can say that what packages the Swagger needs to scan for the API documentation. Instead of scanning the entire application and all the APIs, right? we can say Swagger that, okay, just go and scan the custom packages that I have in my application. You can also have a scan for just controller and services and DTOs. So you can do that by adding property called Spring Doc dot packages to scan. Okay, and here you can have comma separated packages. Okay, for example, I'm just going to give here com GNIT GAN dot airline web service. Okay, so if you want to have multiple packages, then you can just say comma and then give the package name. Okay, but here I'm going to keep it the base package as this. So it's going to scan all the packages under this. That is even the sub packages, all the files under this package. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to customize the UI path. Like if I want to say Spring Doc dot Swagger, you can see that you have something called Swagger UI dot path here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it with airline slash Swagger UI dot html. Okay, and you can also customize the path of the the API docs. Instead of version 3 API docs, you can have a different path. Like what we can do is okay, so for that we have a property called Spring Doc API docs path, and now what we're going to do is we're going to give some customized path for our API docs. Okay, so that is flight API docs. Let's save this and try to access. Okay, the server is started. Let's go to our UI, and if I try to refresh this, it's going to give me an error because the path is no more available, right? So we have updated this to let's see what we updated to. It was this. Let's copy this and go to our UI. If I hit enter, and you can see that it takes me to the UI, right? And you can also see that the path has been, the API docs path also has updated. So if you click on this, it's going to take you to the different path that we had earlier, right? So this is how we can have customization on Swagger configuration. Okay, so one more thing that we can add here is, as we are using Spring ATS in an application, we can add a dependency along with Spring Doc OpenAPI, that is Spring Doc OpenAPI ATS. Okay, we can add it here, and this is basically going to enable the links documentation in our Swagger. Okay, and similarly we also have, if you're using Spring Security, we have a dependency called Spring Doc OpenAPI Security. But for now we are not using Spring Security, but in case if we use, then we can also add that here. Okay, so I hope now you are familiar with Swagger and how you can add it to your application, that is a full web application, and customize the documentation or the configuration for your OpenAPI. Okay, so that's all for this video, and I will see you in the next session.